Hopefully, boys and girls, you're catching some of the exaggerations in our tall tale here, and then also some ways some of the different places in the United States were made by Paul Bunyan and exaggerated that way, like yesterday when he dragged his axe through the desert and he formed the Grand Canyon with the Colorado River. Not really realistic part of making it a tall tale. So let's see if there's any more of those today as we go. And that's what you'll be looking for in your Google form today, some ways that Paul helped create different places in the United States. Chapter 13, The Giant Cornstalk. The Rocky Mountain country was filled with the largest trees that Paul and his men had ever seen. In fact, everything in the country seemed to grow to tremendous size. Even the mosquitoes were as large as mallard ducks. Ugh. And the men used chicken wire for mosquito netting. Ouch. One day, Johnny Inkslinger sent east for some large imported bumblebees to drive the mosquitoes away. The scheme didn't work out very well. The bumblebees immediately made friends with the mosquitoes and even married them. And the worst of it was, their children were even more terrible than the original mosquitoes, for they had large stingers fore and aft, means front and back, and could sting you coming and going. The whole swarm disappeared one day and settled on a ship loaded with sugar that was anchored in Puget Sound. That's out on Washington State. After they had eaten their fill of the sugar, they were too heavy to fly back to land. The entire lot fell into the water and they were all drowned trying to fly ashore. Paul decided that this must be very good farming country and started to look around for a good place to raise vegetables for his camp. He came to a beautiful valley with the richest soil he had ever seen. That's good soil, said Ole the big Swede, but I don't think there is any water in it to make things grow. Paul took a pickaxe he had with him and drove a point of it into the ground. Water spouted out in a great stream 100 feet high. It looks as if there is plenty of water, said Paul. And to this day, the same stream of water still shoots high into the air. It is called Old Faithful Geyser, and you will find it still there in Yellowstone Park. Paul wanted to test the soil, so he planted a kernel of corn. In 5 minutes, the corn sprouted up through the ground and swiftly grew taller and taller. Soon it was over 50 feet high. Paul called quickly to Ole the big Swede. Climb up and cut off the cornstalk so it will branch out. It is growing altogether too tall. Ole climbed the stalk and was soon out of sight. And the cornstalk kept growing higher and higher. When Ole tried to slide down the stem to the ground, he found it grew up faster than he could slide down. In order to save Ole, Paul decided the best thing to do was to cut it down at once. 2 of his men started sawing, but it grew so fast that it jerked the saw right out of their hands. He then gave orders for the 7 axemen to chop it down. They too had to give up as they never hit the cornstalk twice in the same place. By the time they hit it a second time, with their axes, the marks with the first cut had grown out of sight above their heads. For 2 days they tried to cut the stalk down without result. Paul was afraid Ole might starve to death on the top of the cornstalk. So he sent Brimstone Bill back to camp for his shotgun and some of Hot Biscuit Slim's donuts. He finally located Ole with an aid of a spyglass and shot the donuts up to him. About this time, the sheriff came up to Paul. He threw back his coat and showed his policeman's star. Whose cornstalk is this? He demanded gruffly. It's mine, said Paul. Well, it's against the law, said the sheriff, looking very important, and I order that it be cut down immediately. That's exactly what we've been trying to do for 2 days, said Paul. The sheriff finally went away, as he knew that if anyone could cut the stalk down, it would be Paul Bunyan. Brimstone Bill suggested that they twist one of Babe's great iron shoes around the base of the cornstalk and choke off the sap so it would quit growing. This was tried and was a success. The stalk quit growing. Paul then ordered the 7 axemen to chop it down after shouting to Ole to jump just before it hit the ground. The cornstalk was so tall by that time that it took fully 3 hours for it to fall, and Ole had plenty of time to leap to safety as it neared the ground. It fell with such force that it caused cyclones as far away as the Mississippi Valley. Chapter 14. Tiny Tim and the Poisoned Turnips. One summer in the Rocky Mountains, when Paul and his camp at Tadpole Creek, a big lumberjack, walked into the blacksmith shop, Ole and Shot Gunderson were busy at the anvil, punching holes in donuts. "I'm Wildcat Bill, the Bull of the Woods," bellowed the stranger, "and I can whip any man on 2 feet." Ole only laughed and kept on working. "Wait till Paul Bunyan hears this," he said to Shot Gunderson. "And who is this Paul Bunyan?" roared the stranger. "I will break him in two with my bare hands." Paul was walking by and heard this. Paul reached inside, picked him up between his 2 fingers, and dropped him in the creek to cool him off. The whole camp roared with laughter as Wildcat Bill slowly waded to shore. Never did Wildcat Bill call himself the Bull of the Woods, but he hated Paul Bunyan and waited until he could have revenge. He knew Paul loved Babe the Blue Ox, so one day when everybody was in the woods, he hid some poison in a patch of turnips that Babe loved to eat. He left camp thinking no one had seen him. However, Tiny Tim was in the next field. He was building a beehive for his 2 pet bees, Bum and Bill, who made honey for the camp. Tiny Tim saw it all and didn't know what to do. Soon Babe and the Blue Ox returned to camp and went into the turnip field to have his usual lunch of nice, fresh turnips. Tiny Tim waved his hat and shouted at Babe, but Tiny Tim was so small and Babe was so large that the sound never reached his ears. Tiny Tim then tried to climb up one of Babe's front legs, about a warning in his ear. He was almost up to Babe's knee when about 15 feet, which was about 15 feet off the ground, when Babe swished his tail and knocked poor little Tim back into the turnips. The ox thought Tiny Tim was a fly or perhaps a mosquito. "What shall I do?" cried Tiny Tim. He knew Paul Bunyan would be heartbroken if Babe ate the poisoned turnips. Finally, he had an idea. So he ran back to the beehive that he had just built. Bum and Bill, his 2 pet bees, were inside. He closed the door of the beehive and picked up a large stick. Tiny Tim pounded the top of the beehive with the stick, and the 2 bees inside buzzed and buzzed, for they were very angry at being disturbed. Tiny Tim pounded the beehive until the bees were good and angry. "Bzzz," said Bum as he flew madly around inside the hive. "Bzzz," said Bill, who was just as angry as Bum. "Now, we will see what they will do," said Tiny Tim. So he quickly opened the door of the beehive and hid behind the large cabbage. Bum and Bill rushed out, mad as hornets. They saw Babe the Blue Ox in the field eating turnips. They flew at Babe in a beeline. Surely Babe must be the one who disturbed their work. They both stung Babe at the same time. Babe bellowed in fright and ran out of the turnip field. He jumped over the kitchen and knocked down the smokestack. Loads of ashes fell inside and completely covered the fresh batch of hot biscuits that the cooks were making. Babe ran for miles and miles and left huge holes in the ground at every jump. Paul Bunyan learned how Tiny Tim had kept Babe the Blue Ox from eating the poisoned turnips, and he gave Tim a small axe made of the best steel in the country. He promoted Tiny Tim to axeman and took him out into the woods every day with the men. Paul also rewarded Bum and Bill, the pet bees. He sent them to Norway for the flowers they liked and always planted them near the camp. Or he sent to Norway for the flowers, not the bees. He didn't send the bees to Norway. He sent for flowers to come to America. He sent to Norway for the flowers they liked and always planted them near the camp. Bum and Bill, forever after, had the best flowers for making their famous honey. How'd you like to have pet bees like Bum and Bill?